The financial crisis and its effect on the global economy made it obvious that stability of our global market system depends on responsible behavior. How are the companies across the world treating corporate responsibility at the moment?
It's an interesting time. Let's say that to start with. I think it very much depends on the sector. So if you look at the banking sector, which would obviously be a good place to start, the crisis, the causes of the crisis seem in many respects to be attributable, at least in part, to irresponsible behavior. If we go beyond the financial services sector, of course, we're in a recession, and a lot of companies are asking, well, what can we afford to do at a time like this? And I think some companies, when it comes to corporate responsibility projects, are cutting back and saying this is not something we can engage in at the moment. Not least if there are companies that are laying people off, have seen substantial downturns in their markets. But other companies, I think, are still trying to continue their efforts in this area. And in part, it may depend on how genuinely committed to corporate responsibility those companies actually are.
We are here because of your book that is just published here in Poland. And this book advances a new and innovative approach to the task of equipping future business leaders and managers to address today's challenging issues of corporate responsibility. How long did it take you to create this book?
Well, the project took around 4 years, and the book probably another year beyond that, yeah. And the project was about mainstreaming corporate responsibility, so exactly what the book's about, and primarily it was around developing case studies of companies that are engaging on corporate responsibility in a way that is deeply embedded in the organization's practices. And so 12 of the case studies that appear in the book come out of that project directly. But the book goes beyond that, and it's actually structured by the different subjects you'd see in a typical MBA curriculum. So strategy, accounting, finance, marketing, organizational behavior. And in each of the modules there is an introduction to how corporate responsibility is relevant to marketing, say, and then a couple of case studies around corporate responsibility issues as they are particularly relevant to marketing or to strategy or to accounting.
What would be your advice for managers who are thinking of mainstreaming corporate responsibility in their companies?
I think the starting point has to be why you're doing this, and I think each company typically faces a unique set of circumstances. Even within the same industry, the sort of issues that companies need to attend to can differ somewhat. The point is truly to understand not just what a company's social and environmental impacts are, what its footprint is, but also what its particular characteristics are, what it's established as its mission, what it has historically done and been, because that will dictate how it responds to these sorts of issues. And then in terms of having identified the priorities, if you will, for its corporate responsibility strategy, it needs to then embed attention to those issues within its business, and that's a function of the standard stuff of policies and processes, but also it's about winning hearts and minds. And so we speak, Gilberta Lenssena, my co-author and I, speak about the importance of not just hardwiring attention to corporate responsibility in an organization, putting in place those policies, those processes, but also soft wiring. So making sure that people understand why it's important for the organization to be addressing its social and environmental impacts, and believing that that's something that they should and can have an effect on.
So definitely there is a very big role also in communication if you start to be more and more involved in this kind of activities.
Absolutely, communication internally in the first instance, right? And certainly if companies are newly embarking on this topic, it's good advice, I think, not to go out and communicate too much, too quickly externally, and a priority really should be looking at what's happening internally.
In your book you also say about role of education, that it became more and more important also to talk more about corporate responsibilities, and also to change system of education, to talk about it even more.
So historically in business, corporate responsibility has, in many companies, I'd want to stress that there are a good number of excellent companies that are exceptions to this, but in many companies corporate responsibility has been in some sort of public relations ghetto. And it's all about trying to get some message out about the company's good works. Meanwhile, it's a sort of business as usual approach. Well, mainstream corporate responsibility says we want to get companies out of that ghetto, or we want to get corporate responsibility out of that ghetto. And likewise for business schools, we can see a similar picture. So in many business schools there's been a tendency to treat business and society, business ethics, corporate responsibility as this standalone course that doesn't really impact the rest of the education, the rest of the courses that students are exposed to. And that, not surprisingly, tends to lead it to be undervalued by the students. And I think we owe it to them to do a lot more to get attention to these issues throughout their curriculum.
How popular is corporate responsibility for students abroad? Because here in Poland, students are very interested in this topic at the moment.
I think I think worldwide that's the experience. At INSEAD, so I'm a professor of ethics and social responsibility at the INSEAD Business School in Fontainebleau and Singapore. We see students very interested in these issues, not least because they've seen the economic crisis and the consequences of an absence of corporate responsibility, and of course consequences that are affecting them directly, because it's a much tougher job market. But I'd also want to note a generational thing, a generational shift. It's I think true to say that the people that are now coming along in their early 20s are much more attuned to these sorts of issues of social impacts of business, environmental impacts of business, are much more attuned to the problems that we see globally, problems of poverty, problems of climate change, problems of access to essential medicines. These are issues that I think the new generation, the emerging generation of future managers and business leaders, they're much more attuned to these issues and much more concerned about them. And I think that's a great thing, and I think that will have an impact itself in terms of what business does going forward.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Magdalena.